Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
Okay, so welcome everybody to this morning session of the European Alliance Against Coronavirus. Today we will cover an extremely interesting topic, the EU Digital Service Act package. So thank you for joining us. We will have with us Deborah Behar from DG Connect and Dennis Sparat also from DG Connect. They will present, and after that we will open as usual the discussion to all the attendants, and we are looking ahead for your contributions and your ideas. But before entering into it, you need to be aware that we are recording this session and it will be published both in the ECCP and in ECAS, the European Cluster Alliance channels. So if you stay with us, please be aware of that. As during the last meetings, we will start also with some update on what we are doing on the support of the task force that is working at the European level for the increasing of the production capacities for COVID-19 vaccine. So we continue. We had a very important meeting with the Deputy General Director of the Euro past week. Sorry, put your mic off if you are not using it. I'm muting Selby. Thank you. And we received the request to send updated information of the capacities that we are getting from our networks with a deadline of this Wednesday. So we are working a lot. We receive also some new requests, new questions from the European Commission, and we have delivered them to our network. Up to now, we have received 224 answers, and we could say that we have facilities and we have capacities inside Europe that we think that we need to better explore. For sure, there are some bottlenecks. One of them, a very important bottleneck, is related to the lipids with nanoparticles, but I don't know about that. Sorry, I'm not an expert on biotechnology. But anyway, if you have links with those companies that could participate in the whole value chains of the production of vaccines, don't hesitate, please, to contact them. I invite them to participate in the survey or connect directly with the DG Growth, with the task force on vaccines. So that's very important. It's a high priority now for everyone. Does anybody has a question on this point? No? Okay. So if you have any question, please don't hesitate to share in the chat or contact us. Today we are going to speak about digitalization, the Digital Service Act, okay? And I want to remember you that during the work that was done by the expert group on cluster past year, there were 5 recommendations related to the digital transitions, okay? You have them in the screen. The 6th one is to mobilize clusters to participate in digital and green skills initiatives. So skilling, increase cluster capacity to provide advanced business services, very strongly related to today's discussion. Make cluster an integral part of the digital innovation hubs. Use clusters to initiate new and reinforce existing public-private partnerships. I think that is also very related to today's questions. and use cluster as strategic agents for the implementation of European digital policies. Totally related. So the purpose for today is to know about the Digital Act and to explore how clusters can participate, reinforce, and promote what are the main goals of the European Commission with these acts. And in order to speak about it, as I said, we have Deborah Behar and Dennis Sparas. Welcome. I see Dennis in the screen and Deborah.
She has some technical, sorry, good morning.
I'm here.
Hello.
Okay.
Good morning.
Welcome. We can see you. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay. I can give you the presentation rights, or if you want, we could go through your presentation. What do you prefer?
We can take the rights if it works.
Perfect. So thank you, Deborah. You have the role of presentator. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'll start with the Digital Services Act, and then Dennis will come in for the Digital Markets Act. So very nice to meet you. I'm sorry, I'm not sure it's working.
We are not seeing your screen yet.
Okay. So in the meantime, I can present myself. So I'm Deborah Behar. I'm working in DigiConnect in the unit dealing with digital services and platforms, and I'm more specifically, I worked in the team on the Digital Services Act. Apologize, I'm trying to open the document. Okay, it doesn't seem to work.
I can do it if you don't.
Yeah, I don't mind because I don't find the PowerPoint on the application
Have it
that I could open.
Okay.
Thank you. So the Digital Services Act, as I was saying, so I'm in the team together with Dennis in the team that prepared the Digital Services Act. And I will start by presenting you the Digital Services Act, and then Dennis will move to the Digital Markets Act. So the Digital Services Act, if we can start with the next slide, please. Yes, so I will first give you a bit of a background and an introduction on why we did that, why the Digital Services Act. I'll try to go a bit fast for the introduction, so I will not use Dennis' time. So as you see from the slide, the current framework for digital services or platforms is the e-commerce directive that was adopted in 2000. So it's now a framework that is stated. It has 21 years old. And at the time, some big platforms were already out there, like Google, Amazon, but they were different. They were less, they were different compared as we know them today. Other platforms that are important nowadays and where we can hear a lot about them, like TikTok, I don't know, Tinder, LinkedIn, Facebook, they were not out there at the time. So the e-commerce directive is more outdated than some of the platforms we're talking about. If we go to the next slide, please. So, sorry. The next slide, if you click again, sorry. This slide is to show you a bit that the Digital Services Act is not only about what we call them GAFAs, so the main big tech platforms that we hear about, such as Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on. It's important to know that we have around 10,000 platforms in the European Union, and 42% of these platforms are micro platforms. We have also 37% that are medium platforms. So this is to show you that the Digital Services Act, even if there is a specific chapter on what we call very large online platform, it's not only about the big tech companies that we know and that we hear about. It's only about also about the small ones that we have, especially in the European Union. Next one, please. Another factor that we need to take into account and that we took into account while preparing the Digital Services Act is the fact that the business models are constantly evolving in the digital services and in the tech world, let's say. For instance, think about Fortnite, which emerged as a game platform, a gaming platform, and now it's used more and more as a social media platforms where you have more and more chats rather than gaming. If you click again, please. Yeah, another example that shows that the business models are evolving is the marketplaces. So before we were used to hear that like shoes, etc., were sold on online marketplaces such as Amazon, eBay, and so forth. But we see more and more goods that are sold via social media, such as Instagram. So the concept of online marketplaces is evolving, and you have new business models whereby social medias are also starting to sell products. The next slide, please. And next factor that we need to take into account is the fact that illegal content are more and more online. You see more and more illegal content, and you really see it from the graphic and the top down part of the slide. Let's take the example of counterfeit product. We had a loss of 121 billion euro, and you have also a volume of child sexual abuse material that has doubled between 2016 and 2009. So this is a big problem. We have a lot of different type of illegal content that is out there. When we talk about illegal content, we don't talk only about content like information, but this includes also services and products. This is another factor that was important in the evaluation of the Digital Services Act. Next slide, please. Last but not least, as a background information, is what happened very recently with what we can call the Trump saga, where some tweets of Trump were deleted and posts from Trump were deleted unilaterally by platforms. And this really showed that content moderation happens unilaterally and without real transparency or accountability from the platform. So it was a real unilateral decision without really having a framework to understand why and how they did that. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, when having all this introductory backgrounds in mind and this factor in mind, the objective of the DSA and why we did the DSA. First of all, to modernize the rules, because as I said, the framework is back from 2000, so 21 years ago. To clarify the rules of liability, because in the e-commerce directive we have a framework of liability regime, and it was important to clarify it and to update it. To increase the accountability and transparency of online platforms, so to avoid them taking unilateral decisions without understanding why and how they did so. To facilitate better oversight, so to have a better understanding also of how they are functioning and to enforce better the law. And finally, to avoid legal fragmentation, because at national level we had more and more laws, which was bringing legal fragmentation at the European level. So let's enter a bit into the DSA now. Next slide, please. So what does the Commission propose in the DSA? Next slide. Thank you. So this is on the left side, you see the framework of the e-commerce directive. So the directive I was telling you before, the current framework that is from 2000. First, you had specific rules on information society services providers. And then you had what I mentioned before, so the liability exemption, the liability regime, which if you click more time, I think, because it's moving exactly, so you can see that the liability exemption is moving to the right, and you click again, please. Here we are. So as you could see, the liability exemption, so the whole structure around the exemption of liability for information society services. So the fact that, for instance, hosting services, when you host the content from a third party as a platform, you're not liable of that content, except if you had actual knowledge of the presence of an illegal content and you didn't act swiftly to remove that content. So this liability exemption structure and the prohibition of general monitoring obligation, which is the prohibition to impose on a platform the obligation to monitor their content, this moved, the whole structure moved to the Digital Services Act. So we have it now in the new framework too. But close to that, we have added, first of all, precision on consumers and what we call the Good Samaritan clause. Even if the name is a bit too close to the American system, but it was to explain that we have added this provision which make it clear that platforms can have their own voluntary actions to check, for instance, if there is a illegal content and so forth on the platform. That would not have any prejudice on their liability exemptions. Then importantly, close to all this structure, there is now a set of due diligence obligations. So besides the legally speaking liability of platforms, we have more responsibilities for platforms. We will go into more details in what does liability obligation means, but more or less is to we are giving more obligations to act diligently and to be more accountable for platforms. And this is to enforce and to have a stronger structure close to what we had in 2000. So it's not only about liability, but it's also about you platform taking the responsibility to act. And close to this framework again, we have a common enforcement structure, which is much stronger than what we had in 2000, because now we have the digital service coordinators at national level, plus the commission that can act, and we have also structure with the board, but we'll come to that later. In between, sector-specific legislation, so copyright, audiovisual media content, and so forth, that are still in place. Important point, and then we can go to the next slide. The Digital Services Act is a horizontal legislation, so it doesn't go in the details of specific type of illegal content, because illegal contents are defined by national or union law, but it's a horizontal framework that gives the tool to member states to act again what they define illegal content. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, we see a bit the scope. Who are we, let's say, targeting in the Digital Services Act? Which type of what we call digital service we are covering with the Act? The big category that includes all of them, as you can see, is the intermediary services. So we have specific provisions and specific due diligence obligations for those digital services that are offering, for instance, network infrastructure, so your internet access providers at home, or the domain name registries, Wi-Fi hotspot, etc. This is the one part of category that they have some due diligence obligations. Then we still have, as we had in 2000, the hosting service providers. So this is, for instance, all the digital services that are hosting content from third parties. We have here, for instance, the cloud infrastructures, the web hosting, etc. A new category that was created in the Digital Services Act, online platforms. So it's a digital service that doesn't only host content from a third party, but it has also an interface to users. So here we're talking, for instance, about marketplaces. So you have a trader that puts a content and then a user that can see and buy. So it's double interface. App stores, collaborative economy platforms, social media, and so forth. And finally, as I was mentioning before, we have specific obligations for what we call very large online platforms. These are platforms that are reaching around 45 million users, which represent 10% of the EU population. In the next slides, we will enter in the more detailed structure of what I told you before, so the due diligence obligations that accompany the liability regime. Here you can see that there is a sort of asymmetrical approach. So you have different types. You have the list of the due diligence obligations that are in the Digital Services Act on your left, and you can see that they are asymmetrically applied to the different type of digital service I was mentioning before. So, for instance, for all intermediaries, you have 4 specific due diligence obligations: to have a point of contact, to have a legal representative, and this is a novelty in the Digital Services Act. So, the obligation to have a legal representative in the Union when you're a platform coming from a third country. Some rules on terms of and conditions, so more transparency on terms of condition and reporting obligations. Then I'm not going to list them all because I think otherwise Dennis will not have time to enter in the Digital Markets Act, but to show you that, for instance, online platforms have also other important due diligence obligations. And finally, very large platforms have all of them, and these are cumulative obligations. In the next slide, we'll enter more specifically in some type of due diligence obligation just to show you a part of them. First, the notice and action procedure. So the obligation to have a mechanism by which a user can notify the presence of an illegal content on the platform. Trusted flagger status is for the possibility for specific entities to have this privileged status to notify the presence of an illegal content to a platform. Know your business customer obligations. So for online marketplaces, the obligation to gather the information on traders that are using their platforms to sell their goods or products. Then repeat infringer policy. So when you have a rogue, let's say, user that keeps posting illegal content on your platform, then you can suspend his account. Codes of conduct and removal and information orders. So authorities that can send orders to platforms that are established in another member state to ask them to remove a content or to obtain specific information, etc. So these are part of the due diligence obligations, but it's really to show you that the Digital Services Act is adding this layer and this set of obligations for platform to really act diligently and be responsible. Next slide, please. So here I think you have to click more time. Quickly there, as I told you, like what we call very large online platforms, so those that have 45 million users are those having all of the due diligence obligations because of their role in society, the fact that they're becoming like they're having more and more importance, especially now with COVID. I think Facebook is becoming like a public space where everyone says and see what they want, and they're having a very, let's say, important position in this society, and it's where we can see more and more systemic risks for the societies too. So that's why they have all of the list of due diligence obligation plus some specific one for them. And here, first of all, we see that they have to assess the risk that their platforms are presenting for society, and then they have to prepare a mitigation plan, let's say, to show how they are mitigating the risk that their platforms is causing to society. They're also they are also subject to an annual independent audit, which covers the compliance with all the due diligence obligations they're subject to. So as you see, they're more monitored and required to have a really more transparency, accountability, and showing their harm, how they mitigate their harm, and like really being more responsible and transparent. Next one. Thank you. So this is more or less the part, so we have not entered yet in the governance of the DSA, but this is the part, the content, let's say, part. And in a nutshell, as I was saying, so the Digital Services Act keeps the principle behind the e-commerce directive. So in the previous slide, you could see that the liability structure was moving to the DSA, and we have kept this liability structure that was already in the e-commerce directive with some clarifications. It modernizes the structure. It also promotes the adoption of proactive measures. You could see it in the previous slide. So platforms can have voluntary and own initiatives and action to go against illegal content, and this will not have any impact on their liability exemptions. Then it imposes asymmetric due diligence obligations. You could see before the different categories of digital services, and this is to fight against illegal and harmful content, to empower users and stakeholders, and to improve transparency. Finally, there is the cooperation mechanism between platforms and authorities and among authorities, and this brings us to the next slide, where I will, I think, go quickly because I don't have time anymore to the enforcement part, because close to all the due diligence obligation and what the responsibilities that platforms have, there is also a new structure to govern and to ensure enforcement of these rules. This, let's go quickly about on that. It's what I was telling you before. So Article 8 and Article 9 of the Digital Services Act gives the possibility to authorities to require to an online platform of another member states to remove content or to provide information on a specific host. I think. No. Okay. Next one, please. This is quickly the governance structure of the Digital Services Act. So we have now this new role of the Digital Services Coordinator. So these are competent authorities in member states that should be independent and have the direct supervision and enforcement of the DSA obligations, the obligation to coordinate also with other digital services coordinators from other member states, and to coordinate with the board and the commission. Close to that, we have the European Board for Digital Services, which is this advisory group that is composed by the digital services coordinators, is shared by the commission, and it gives advices and non-binding acts. Finally, we have now more role for the European Commission. So besides the administrative support to the board and the decision on cross-border dispute, it has also now a direct enforcement power vis-a-vis very large online platforms. Next slide, please. I think let's jump this one because it covers what we had said before. Yes, so as I was saying, now the Commission has more enforcement power vis-a-vis very large online platforms. It can also impose a sanction which can amount to 6% of the turnover. And so this is a new power that the Commission has specifically for very large online platforms that are not enforcing and that are not compliant with the obligations of the Digital Services Act. I think this slide, as you will share this slide, you can perhaps see it later because I really think that I'm very late. So I would stop here and maybe answer to questions in case I didn't cover everything. Thank you and apologize for being so long.
Thank you to you. You're welcome, Deborah. Okay, I will propose to take the possibility to open the dialogue later, if you don't mind. Okay, I think
Sure.
we have to hear now Dennis Sparas, and we can return to you. But thank you. It has been very interesting. And now I will give the floor to Dennis, that will speak about the Digital Market Act. Dennis, should I give you the presentation rights, or would you prefer that I present?
We can try, and if it doesn't work, you can do it. I mean, okay, I have no strong opinion.
Welcome.
Can you see?
Yes, not in full screen mode yet, but
No, sorry. Let me just. Now it's better.
No, not yet. Now it's
Can you
perfect.
see or?
Now it's
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Denise.
Sure.
Mauricio.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will try to be short and brief, and of course, happy to answer any questions. You know, if we don't have time today, I mean, I guess we can always come back. So, as already mentioned at the beginning, as Antonio already mentioned, on 15th of December, the Commission adopted the package of two measures. One was the Digital Services Act that Deborah was talking about, and the other one is the Digital Markets Act that I will be talking about a little bit. I mean, the main difference between the two, you know, in very nutshell, let's say, is while Digital Services Act more focuses on some of the, you know, tackling some of the societal risks that comes with the digital transformation of the society, the Digital Market Act has a more specific focus on some of the more economic related issues, which relate to the appearance of very large online platforms, you know, and the potentially unfair behavior that these platforms may engage in, and the impact that this may have on both business users but also end users that use these services. And I mean, on this slide, I will not dwell too much into it. You will see that, you know, the process of thinking of, you know, whether there is a need to act on certain issues which are happening in the online environment in relation to very large online platforms has, you know, the process of reflection has been ongoing for years. And this process is both very active in Europe, but also outside Europe. You will see, for example, that the Commissioner Vestager at the time had commissioned a special advisors report, which was prepared for her in 2019. There were several reports by national competition authorities about issues in relation to very large online platforms and their behavior on the market. Both councils, so member states, and European Parliament with calling for action. Also, some stakeholders, including consumer protection bodies, and all this led the Commission to launch two inception impact assessments before summer last year, which essentially on one side would be looking at, you know, is there a need for ex-ante rules for these large online platforms called gatekeepers? And on the other side, is there a need to have some sort of a, you know, new competition tool, something which complements the existing competition law framework and that could facilitate, could tackle issues related to existence of such platforms and, you know, possible issues that derive from their behavior on the market. The consultation was rather successful. We have received a lot of input, both, you know, on both files, and especially on the Digital Markets Act. A lot of input was very extensive, with a lot of also evidence which was brought forward by the stakeholders. One thing which came out relatively clearly from the public consultation was that there is the most effective and efficient way forward is to actually merge the two initiatives, which were previously consulted separately, into one single initiative. And that's why, you know, instead of having two sets of rules today, what we proposed was essentially the Digital Markets Act. What is very important maybe to keep in mind from the start is that this act does not replace, for example, the existing consumer protection legislation, and also does not replace competition law. So, I mean, it only complements both sets of rules. And we can go further here. For example, it also doesn't replace in any way data protection legislation. It just complements what we already have as a standard with the GDPR and e-privacy framework. So coming more specifically to the Digital Markets Act, what are the core principles? One thing is it's a internal market proposal. So it essentially seeks to harmonize rules across the member state to ensure contestability and fairness in those markets where gatekeepers are present. And the objective and the main aim is to address any possible negative consequences which may derive from, you know, unfair behavior by these platforms. Now, of course, it's not about all platforms. It's similarly to what if you think about the slide that Deborah was showing, how many platforms we actually have in European Union. You will all remember that very recently platform to business regulation came into application, and that regulation essentially, introduces very wide transparency measures for platforms in dealings with their business users. The objective of DMA is much more narrow. It's really trying to focus on gatekeeper platforms and and problems, issues that may arise from their behavior on the market. Now, of course, to be able to say who are these gatekeepers, you need to set certain criteria and requirements. And you will see on the slide we have set three, which are based on the evidence which we have collected, and that were kind of pointing to these. First requirement that the gatekeeper has to fulfill is that it has a significant impact on the internal market. This means, the Digital Markets Act is essentially looking at those large online platforms whose impact on the trade between member states is significant. So this doesn't mean that, for example, you may not have gatekeepers also at the national level, but the focus of the DMA is really at the European level and at the largest platforms whose behavior may undermine, fairness and contestability of the digital markets. What is also very important, and this comes back to the core of the gatekeeper status, is that they serve as an important gateway for business users to reach their customers and vice versa. So essentially, maybe too strong word, but if you think about it, they serve in one way or another as indispensable partners for business users and end users to actually be able to communicate with each other and benefit from each other's presence on this platform. And then the third requirement is that they enjoy or may enjoy in a foreseeable future an entrenched and durable position. So essentially the idea here is, you don't want to take an action against a platform whose position is, of short life, or where you essentially see that the market position of a gatekeeper may be a result of an exceptional circumstance. So we are really looking here at those platforms which have an entrenched position for a relatively long period of time. The scope of the act refers to core platform services offered by gatekeepers. And when we talk about core platform services, it's important to keep in mind, because it doesn't. So the Digital Market Act is not supposed to apply to each and every service of the gatekeeper, arguably, but only to those services which we identified as core platform services. And again, I didn't put it on the slide, but if you look at the impact assessment, you will, for example, see what type of criteria we have taken in order to identify those core platform services. And examples of such services would be online search engines, online intermediation services, video sharing platform, number independent interpersonal communication services. So different type of services, but they are defined in the DMA very clearly in Article 2.2. There are 8 of those core platform services, and essentially that's the scope of the DMA. Sorry. Gatekeepers are in principle designated in 2 ways. One is, based on quantitative criteria, which, however, is based on a principle of rebuttable presumption. So even if you meet those quantitative criteria, a gatekeeper may still bring forward sufficiently substantiated arguments that even though they meet those quantitative thresholds, they do not meet the requirements of gatekeeper platforms. Or the other way is, to designate them based on a market investigation, which is essentially a qualitative assessment. Again, I didn't put here on the slide what type of criteria we would be looking at there, but if you are interested, I would advise you to look at Article 3.6 of the DMA, which specifically defines what type of criteria Commission would be looking at in the context of the market investigation. This slide is essentially, let's say, a bit more focused, looking into how the designation process would look like. As I already said, on the left-hand side, you have the requirements that the platform has to meet in order to be considered a gatekeeper platform. As I said, on the right-hand side, you have quantitative criteria, which are based on rebuttable presumption, and the type of criteria we have been putting down is, you will see, EA turnover on a yearly basis, then average market capitalization or equivalent fair market value for companies which are not listed, and then they have to provide this core platform service in at least 3 member states, which comes back, you know, to the requirement of their significant impact on the internal market. Then when it comes to the important gateway function, the assumption is based on the number of monthly active users and number of business users on a yearly basis, and then entrenched position when criteria B is essentially satisfied in the last 3 years. And if you meet those quantitative thresholds, there is a notification obligation and procedure, but I will not go into too many details. Happy to answer any questions. And then on the bottom of left-hand side, as I already mentioned, you know, besides the ability to designate based on meeting quantitative thresholds, there is also possibility to designate a provider of core platform service as a gatekeeper following a market investigation, which in principle should be finished within 12 months after opening of the procedure. Now, that's one building block of the DMA. Another important building block, which everybody and most people are very much focusing on, is the question of obligations. So what does the DMA actually requires these providers of core platform services, or you know, that are acting as gatekeepers to do? And DMA sets defines a specific, well-defined, narrowly defined obligations for these gatekeepers. Those obligations are laid down in, let's say, 4 provisions with a specific focus on Articles 5 and 6, because those lay down the main chunk of these obligations. So if we talk about, so what is very important as a principle here is to say all obligations are directly applicable. So once you're designated as a gatekeeper, the question is not whether you have to comply with these obligations. You have to as a gatekeeper. So it's not a question of if, but it's more a question of how. And when it comes to question of how, it's only in relation to obligations which are laid down in Article 6 of the DMA. So obligations which are laid down in Article 5, like for example, ban to combine personal data from different data sources, that's something which is, you know, directly applicable, but also directly implementable. There is no question how this should be done. Or for example, like ban on gatekeepers to prevent complaints to the competent authorities. On the other side, you have certain obligations where there may be a need for certain regulatory dialogue between the gatekeeper and the regulatory authority, in this case, the European Commission, how these obligations should be implemented in order to ensure that there is effective compliance with the obligations. And that's why we say there is a slight difference between obligations in Articles 5 and 6, but just to keep in mind that they are both directly applicable. Obligations will always apply to core platform services that meet the conditions, and there are very narrow exemptions from, you know, compliance with these obligations, like in case of public interest, but then also in case of economic viability of operations for the gatekeeper platform. Another important thing here is, and which comes back to the one of the previous slide, is that there are a specific set of obligations. So from the whole scope of the obligations, and maybe one thing I forgot to say was, once you're designated as a gatekeeper, all obligations apply to you, and you have to comply with all of them. I mean, it may be the case that some of the obligations are applicable only to a specific type of service. For example, when we talk about fair and non-discriminatory access conditions for app stores, of course, that type of obligation apply only to App Store. But some other obligations, like, you know, ban on allowing complaints to competent authorities, would apply to all core platform services. But there is a specific group of gatekeepers, which are so-called emerging gatekeepers, which do not have a gatekeeper status yet, but may have it in a foreseeable future. And in those cases, not all obligations apply to them, but only a subset of these obligations, which is decided by the Commission following a market investigation. So on those, only those obligations are imposed which are necessary and appropriate to safeguard contestability of the markets. And now a bit on the examples, but I was already a bit referring to that. You know, I try to cluster them here in specific group. So when we talk about data-related unfair practices, there is obligation not to use non-publicly available commercially sensitive data of business users for your own purposes. So a typical situation where an online platform may have a dual role. So on one side, there would be an online marketplace, for example, and at the same time they would be also providing a retail services. So in those circumstances, it's important to ensure that you know the fact that the online marketplace has access to some of the information of its business user is not used for you know unfair behavior at the retail level. Then there is an obligation to provide effective portability of data both on the business user side and the end user side. We have a specific group of practices which deal with unfair favorable treatment. So, for example, obligation to allow business users to promote their offers to their customers, also outside the Gatekeeper platform, and then also the ability of the end users to benefit from what they acquired outside the Gatekeeper's platform on the Gatekeeper platform. I already referred to unfair access conditions, and there are also a number of obligations concerning unfair advertising related practices. Again, the main objective there is to ensure transparency in a system which is very often considered opaque and unclear. I already talked about the regulatory dialogue. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Another important building block of the DMA is ability to conduct a market investigation. Of course, there are some procedural requirements like you know, obligation to open proceedings formally, which means that the addressee of the market investigation is essentially aware that the Commission is investigating a specific issue and what is that the Commission is investigating. There are three scenarios for market investigation in the DMA. One is, as I already mentioned, designation of a gatekeeper. So the Commission would open a market investigation in view of designating a specific provider of core platform service as a gatekeeper should the requirements in Article 3.1 be met. Then another issue is market investigation in case of systematic non-compliance. This would be the case where, for example, gatekeeper platform that is already designated would systematically not comply with the obligations laid down in the DMA, and that would be established either through non-compliance decisions or through fines decisions. There is a presumption that, you know, if you have three non-compliance or fines decision in relation to a specific core platform service, that could be considered as a systematic non-compliance, which could lead to additional behavior or even structural measures. And then the last possibility of market investigation, which is very important in view of ensuring future proving of the tool, is ability to investigate whether there is a need to include new core platform services or identify new unfair practices which would require specific obligations in the future. The idea of this market investigation is to investigate the market, prepare a report, which would also be accompanied where justified with the proposal to change the Digital Markets Act. And very quickly on the governance structure, I mean, again, as we are talking about EU-wide gatekeepers who are designated, who are active across the EU, and if you think about the requirements, it's really about the largest online platforms. The DMA envisages that the Commission is the competent to ensure effective implementation and enforcement of the DMA, and you will see here few of the tasks that the Commission is carrying out. On the other side, since you know there is a lot of experience and knowledge also in the national competent authorities, the DMA also envisages establishment of an advisory committee who should advise the Commission both in relation to the daily implementation and enforcement of the DMA, but also in relation to some other things. What is also very interesting, maybe to mention specifically, is that, for example, if the three member states ask the Commission to initiate market investigation because they consider that a specific specific provider of core platform service is a gatekeeper, the Commission actually has to open such a market investigation. And I would finish here. Apologies for being a bit long, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Denise. It has been very clear and interesting. So we have now 10 minutes for the open discussion, questions, comments. Who is the first? The floor is open for everybody. Who wants to? Somebody? I was thinking about how clusters are affected by these acts. You know, we are defining a lot of market platforms inside our projects, and for us it's very important to be able to compete fairly with those markets. For example, we have now a project, a proposal on the plastics, and we were designing how to really be competitive against the big platforms in this playing field. And so I understand that your initiatives are enabling us to do that. That's quite important. So to know about it is critical. How do you see our role? What have you thought about? What can we do from our side in order to collaborate with you? It will be just diffusion of the information.
Maybe Dennis can cover the markets part, but I think yes, the information is key for sure. I think especially in the Digital Services Act, it's all about cooperating with authorities, cooperating between platforms, between authorities, being transparent, having more knowledge on what's going out there, avoiding to have black boxes, as we call them, in big platforms and not knowing what's happening. So I think knowledge for sure is key, transparency is key, and collaboration with authorities, because I think what was missing in the previous years was a strong enforcement and governance structure, and now with the DSA we hope that this will be solved, and this could work, especially if we have cooperation, also cross-border cooperation, because platforms don't have frontiers, they're all around Europe. A content can fly around across the borders without being able to see that it's actually going out there. So I think cross-border cooperation is also key. On the competition / markets part, I think Dennis is better placed than me to answer.
Yes, I think, you know, I think the real added I mean, of course, you know, now we are at the stage where the process, I mean, where we are already entering the co-legislative process, but I think also in that process it's very good that all stakeholders, you know, speak up, and to, I mean, I think from both sides, you know, both Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act, really identify type of issues that they are facing, and where they believe, you know, that the two proposals are going in the right direction, or where they consider that there are still certain, let's say, areas that would require particular attention. And again, you know, if I'm thinking about you know, SMEs who are using services of some of these very so let's say gatekeeper platforms, right? I think it's very important to be very clear that with the type of obligations that we are putting forward, we are actually capturing most of the concerns that are being put forward. Again, you know, we have based these obligations on the evidence which we have collected, you know, both from our antitrust enforcement, all the input which we have received through the public consultation. Of course, number of studies and reports, including case studies which were in our impact assessment support study. But it's always good, if the stakeholders also put forward very concrete examples of the type of practices that they are facing, and how this is being resolved. So I think in that sense, any type of information you can put forward, at least especially on the DMA side, I think it's very useful for us.
That's very clear. Thank you, Dennis. It's important for us to understand how can we contribute, and that is, I think, now clear. Aurora, I see that you have a comment in the chat. Will you share?
Well, my question, good morning. My question is related to the application of the rules. Individual companies, online shops, most of them, I believe, are based on large platforms. Like, for instance, in my company, we use WooCommerce to build our shop. So I don't know at what extent the rules apply to those platforms or to the individual companies. When you speak about the rules for the big ones.
Well, I mean, so for example, I guess this is much more about the DSA, but on the DMA side, for example, because the threshold for the gatekeepers is so high, you essentially, as a business user of a platform that facilitates your access to end users, this is not about you as a user of that big platform. Now, of course, that platform could theoretically be designated as a gatekeeper, but I'm talking theoretically, because of course, let's say the requirements are put very, very high. On the other side, I will let Deborah answer the part on the DSA, but again, it will very much depend what type of rule, which rules are you talking about? Because of course, there is a set of rules that will apply to both the online platform that facilitates your access to end users, but also to you as a trader online. But I let Deborah reply.
Yeah, thank you for the DSA. I guess, yeah, it's exactly what Dennis was saying. So you as a company, if you use a platform to reach more easily consumers, then you're using an online platform. So the online platform that you're using to reach your consumer will have a set of responsibilities to be also more transparent vis-a-vis your company too, but also vis-a-vis the users and the consumers that will then buy or have access to what your company is offering through the online platform. When we're talking about very large online platform, we're not talking about a single company that is using a platform to reach out to consumers, but we are talking about the platform per se. So the platform that is intermediating between your company and the consumer. And if this platform is a very large online platform, so if this platform has more than 45 million users, then it has specific set of other due diligence obligations, so more due diligence obligations, such as assessing the risk that the platform is causing to society, mitigating search risk, having audits, etc. So when we talk about the size of the platforms, is not the single company that is using it, but it's the platform that is helping your company to reach out to consumers.
My concern is not about my company, of course.
It was have
all the steps to know what we should do. It's about to be sure how these rules can cover the bad practices. Like, for instance, the small companies. If these laws are more driven to fight illegal acts, and are more focused and have all the eyes on the large entities, how can they avoid bad practices like non-protection of the final clients, which depend on the data that each company puts on the platforms, and how can they prevent the parallel economy, like the counterfacts, because the platforms do not know the source of the goods that are sold in there, so they don't know if the goods have been stolen or so that's my concern. How can we
Yeah.
cover both sides?
Yeah, I think there you have also both sides in terms of DSA and DMA, and I'll start with the DSA. So this is precisely what we are talking about, the liability exemption plus the due diligence obligation. So when you're saying that the platform cannot know where the good is coming from, this is what is covered when we say liability exemptions. So you platform are not liable if there is an illegal content, including illegal good, on your platform, as long as you're not aware of it, and if you're aware, you remove it expeditiously. So this is protecting, in a way, the fact that all platforms cannot know where this good is coming from, and they cannot generally monitor what there are thousands, millions, billions of goods, content moving out there, so they cannot monitor each and single good product, service, or content. But close to that, even if you're not liable, you have now to have a specific set of obligations. You have to be compliant with these obligations to ensure to users and business users too that the online environment is safe, is trustworthy, is transparent. So even if you're not 100% liable in some instances, you have to show how you're doing things. You have, for instance, for marketplaces, so where you have the sale of products, you have to obtain the information on the identity of who is selling the product on your platform. This is the Know Your Business Customer obligation I was mentioning before. Or you have a set of obligations too, because you need to be accountable, even if you're not always liable. So this is a clear distinction, and this is exactly what you were saying. So we cannot pretend from a platform to know every single origin of the good, etc. But they cannot be liable in all instances. But you have to be accountable and responsible and ensure that the online environment is trustworthy, and as a consumer, I can feel safer. Dennis,
And
sorry, I think that.
sorry, I don't want to monopolize, but another of my concerns is if these platforms are based out of Europe, how can you enforce them to use those laws to accomplish with those rules?
Yeah, so there is an obligation in the DSA which obliges online platforms that are directing their offer to the EU to have a legal representative in the European Union. So if you're reaching out to users that are located in the EU, you're obliged to have someone that represents and is responsible for your platform in the Union. So this is new in the DSA. It didn't exist before, but now there is this obligation. So as long as they try to reach out to someone that is located in the union, they have to have someone physically present in the union representing them and being responsible for the platform. This is, I can't even
And I
tell you
think
the
also
article.
what is very important, sorry, I think what is also very important in this context is if you don't designate a legal representative as a third country service provider, any member state can regulate you, you know. So essentially, while there is a principle of country of origin in the DSA, for the third country service providers, that means country where the legal representative is nominated. But if you don't designate one, any member state, so any of the 27 could essentially take measures against you. And in worst case scenario, you know, those measures could also lead to measures such as removal or, you know, disabling access to a specific website if really compliance could not be ensured by any less restrictive measure. So I think it's important to keep in mind that you know, because if your next question would be, but what if they don't nominate the legal representative? Well, then, you know, they are subject to 27 laws, which is not normally the practice, or it's rather not a practice, because the DSA is based on country of origin principle.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, obrigado, Aurora, for your question. Thank you, Denise, Deborah, for your contribution. Information is key, and I'm sure that this is very relevant for our businesses, for the companies working on clusters, and every company working on or collaborating with those platforms across Europe. So thank you, congratulations for your work. Thank you for sharing with us, and we continue in touch. Thank you, and I hope to see you too next Thursday, that we will continue thinking about digital, but in this case, in relationship with the Digital Innovation Hub. You are invited. See you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you for having us. Bye.